Hi guys, welcome to another video. This time I will be talking about Hainbach's test equipment sample library Landfill Totems because I wanted to revisit it and I thought I'd take you along for the ride. This sample library already came out 2 years ago and it is made in collaboration with Spitfire Audio. I bought it back then along with the album on vinyl. I really enjoy Hainbach's Landfill Totems album and I love the original video that he did about the Landfill Totems 4 years ago. It was a really cool project and I just love the sounds that he gets out of these things. If you're unfamiliar with test equipment, it is basically equipment that is not meant for making music, but for testing purposes in military applications or scientific applications. And it's not inherently meant to make music, but to do something else. And this repurposing of things that are not meant to music, I always found that really interesting. This actually goes back to the history of electronic music. Lately I've been listening to a lot of this old type of tape music that was made with old test equipment, Stockhausen and Daphne Oram and that sort of thing. Daphne Oram was a figure influential in the BBC Radiophonic workshop. If you don't know anything about it, I will link some videos in the description where you can check out more about it. It's super interesting stuff and I really enjoy the music too because it's so unusual.
There are some people who think the music of the future will sound like this.
I also used to listen to a lot of Stockhausen and he used those kinds of tools as well for making music, and that's all fascinating. Playing around with that sort of equipment isn't really what I had in mind for my own music, mainly because it's very heavy gear that might break any moment and you would have to ship it here into this remote corner of Spain. It's not like with Heinbach, who can probably find some of this stuff used in Berlin. He has access to those sorts of places that would have that stuff lying around. And around here, you wouldn't find that anywhere. So I didn't really think that I would get the chance of trying this sort of thing out. But then he made this sample library and it was an instant buy for me because I wanted to play around with the sounds. They all sounded so cool in his demo and it's just such an interesting, quirky collection of samples. The samples were actually recorded from a sound installation that he made with some test equipment that was called the Landfill Totems, and it started out in an art gallery as a sort of experimental music type thing. Making a sample library with that as a starting point is just, fantastic. And I just really wanted to play around with it, so I bought it immediately and I played around with this sample library a lot while I was making my latest album, Hypnagogia. It was written 2 years ago, so in 2021 when this sample library came out. It was basically the next album after the sample library came out, and I decided to use it for the album because the sounds are just so inspiring. I used them as a sort of starting point. I was working around those basically with the rest, and it just was such an inspiring collection of sounds, and the music flowed really naturally from it. So this is really a sample library that I would highly recommend. Using a sample library is very different from hardware equipment. You don't really get the breakdowns that you have with old analog equipment like this. There is in the sample library one sound that I really find fascinating, which is called broken oscillator. That probably tells you everything about the state of some of this equipment when Hainbach found it. I'm certain that some of these sounds happened while this equipment wasn't quite functioning properly anymore, and that's fascinating itself. Having these kinds of sounds in a sample library that will not fail you, that will not break in the middle of you writing the track, is something nice to have, and that was a little bit reassuring. The sample library is really very simple to use. You have just these two sliders on the left. One is an expression slider, the other is a dynamic slider. The dynamics is actually quite interesting. If you slide that up, it gets you into a sort of processed sound, so you can move from one sound into another basically. It's quite interesting, and you can do that with the mod wheel, so that's really cool. I'm not really a keyboard player, so I don't really use that a lot. I used it just with a MIDI keyboard, and not with my big MIDI keyboard that even has a mod wheel, but with a small MIDI keyboard that doesn't have those sorts of bells and whistles. So that wasn't really something I used. If you click on a circle in the middle, you get more controls. You can put reverb on it, you can put delay on it and distortion, and there's also fine control over attack and release, which can be very useful. Up top you can change the sample and play them and load them and so on. Very simple to use. The samples are grouped according to categories that are descriptive if you're German, but probably not very descriptive if you're not. They're called Kling, Klang, Knarz and Krach. Krach is the German word for noise. Knarz is like a I don't even know how to translate that. Kling and Klang are more melodic, I suppose, and Krach and Knarz are not really that. They're more rhythmic maybe. There are some drum loops too that I haven't really used because that's not my type of thing. My favorites are Distance and the Beauty Oscillator. The Beauty Oscillator in itself is already worth buying this library for, I would suppose. I really like that one, and it's a wonderful sound, really lovely. I also really like Distance. I also used that on a track or two. But there are really very interesting sounds all over the place. I could get several albums out of this one as an inspiration. It's super interesting. Well, let's make some music with it. Lately I felt inspired by all this tape music and experimental music I've been listening to, and I wanted to play around with this library a bit more. And I thought I'd make another track in a similar style, starting out from a sound in this library. Of course, I had to choose the Beauty Oscillator. There was just no way around it. I put down some melodies on my little Akai MIDI keyboard. It's not a MIDI keyboard for keyboard players, definitely not. I use that if I want to just lay down some quick melodies like this. From there I layered it with Pure Magnetic's Shrike, which is a sort of shimmer generator. It has several LFOs and you can animate the shimmer in space. It's really very interesting. I really love this plugin. It's really very beautiful too. I thought that would be a very interesting fit for the Beauty Oscillator. From there I thought I'd go a bit crazy and put in some modular stuff. Didn't want to mess about with the hardware in this case. I just pulled up VCV Rack as a plugin and made something that was sort of in the same ballpark as the Beauty Oscillator. There's an even VCO and there is a noise source in it, so it's also an oscillator and a bit of noise, like the Beauty Oscillator. And I took that and routed that through clouds in granular mode, which is one of my favorites anyway. I use clouds a lot for my music. Of course, I also have some modulation in there. I use an Ocht, which I have as a hardware module too. It's a very immediate module. It doesn't have an awful lot of controls, so it's just very simple to use, and that helps if you need a lot of organic modulation. and it's just very simple. So it's not a very complicated patch, and it was something that was supposed to be possible on my proper real world modular, so I didn't go crazy with 4 different clouds and the kind of crazy stuff that I normally do in BCB Rack. I kept it simple on purpose because there's already quite a lot going on with the melody, and yeah, it turned out interesting. I like the textures that I got with it. I was inspired by tape music that I've been listening to, so I wanted to use some tape on it. And my original idea for this was to use my microcassette recorder. The only problem was that in the middle of trying to record this, I realized that my microcassette recorder had died in the meantime. I don't know when or how, maybe it got broken in the move, but it would not play anymore. So I messed about with my other tape recorders and realized that all of them have broken somehow. It was a bit of a sad discovery. In the end, I found one tape deck that works, and that is my Yamaha multi-track that for some reason reliably works anyway. It wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I wanted something a lot more degraded than that, so I plugged in my Shure 520DX microphone, which is like a harmonica microphone that I use for effects, and when I occasionally use lyrics or something like that, I will use that microphone. Recording through this degraded the sound quite a bit, and it got closer to what I had in mind. Of course, my Yamaha doesn't warble like my microcassette recorder did, so I ended up putting on another Hainbach plugin called Wires. It is a simulation of a Soviet wire recorder that can create all sorts of nice hiss and warble and crackle and pops, and that created the effect that I actually wanted, which was a more degraded kind of microcassette type sound. I got somewhere with it in the end, and it was a kind of frustrating experience because this happened at about 2 or 3 a.m. and I ended up taking apart all my cassette recorders and not getting anywhere with it. In the end, the multi-track was what I settled on, and that was my solution to finish the track. Not exactly according to plan, but this is what happens when you use hardware. So sample libraries have their advantages. They don't break in the middle of making a track. So this was a lot of fun. I really love how this track turned out. I think the sample library is super inspiring. It got me into the same feeling that I had when I was listening to all this tape music, and that was exactly what I needed. So perfect sample library. I love it. Do check it out. I leave a link in the description to it where you can find it, and it will lead you to the website of Spitfire Audio. Now, Spitfire Audio actually has been surrounded by some controversy in the recent past. There were some Red Means recording videos on the subject. I will link those too. They are quite interesting and enlightening about many different things. As it turns out, one of the owners of Spitfire Audio outed himself as a TERF on Twitter. Yeah, I don't really want to be associated with that sort of thing. I will always stand with trans people, but at the same time, that will not stop me from using this library or the free sample libraries that Spitfire put out, because if we were to stop everything that we're doing on account of some capitalist somewhere doing or saying something awful, I don't think we could do anything anymore. All of the products that we buy have some immoral aspect because they were produced under, capitalist circumstances. There's always exploitation involved in that, and if you start worrying about that one, then you're gonna have an existential crisis. I do understand completely that Red Means Recording doesn't want to have anything to do with them anymore, and that's completely understandable. but for me that's not really an option because I own their products and I use them and I like them, and I don't think that that's the way to go. I don't think boycotting them is the way to go. I don't think it's fair on the artists who work with Spitfire, or on the programmers who work for them, or on the sound engineers who work for them. After all, it's just one capitalist doing awful things, and that's really nothing new, right? If you're interested in the reasons why capitalists say and do awful things, then I have one reading recommendation for you, which is Karl Marx Capital. It is very enlightening on that subject. There's some chapters that are quite dry reading because there's a lot of data in them, but it is a riveting read anyway because there are werewolves in it and vampires and a lot of cynical takedowns of thinkers of the same time, and it's actually quite an entertaining read, surprisingly so. So do check that out. I will also link a course in the description by David Harvey, which is a guide on how to read Capital, and that's super helpful to get through it. And even if you don't agree with any of Marx's conclusions, the analysis is interesting anyway and well worth reading. And that might explain some of the, behaviors that you can expect from certain people who have far too much money, and why they have a tendency to hoard more and more of it. And why am I talking of Marx of all people in a video about a sample library? Well, I do come from a place that used to be called Karl Marxstadt, so I've been aware of these sorts of issues all my life, and I do tend to recommend Marx whenever I get the opportunity to talk about him, because it's a very interesting read, and who doesn't like to read about vampires, right? If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the music in this video, then you can check out my bandcamp link in the description, and there you can find my newest release, Hypnagogia. You heard some of the music from it in this video, so if you like the music, then it's probably worth checking out. There's also more music there, my first album for example, which is more straight up ambient. You can also support my channel on Ko-fi, where you can get early access to my videos or download all the music in them. And this includes all of my recent tracks, also the ones that I'm writing right now, so you can get early access already there. And yeah, there's much more, just check it out if you want to support what I do. You can also super thanks and all of that good stuff. This really helps me out to make these videos possible, because it gives me time to spend on them, and that way I can bring you more. So thanks for all your support, it really helps. In any case, I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!